Welcome to Dad Hammer, Bolters and Booze, where we discuss all things Warhammer while staying hydrated with an adult beverage. I am David the Warboss, and I'm joined as always by the most generic space marine in the Imperium, Mr. Medicae Steve. Steve, how we doing?
Doing great, buddy. Just getting through near the end of the week. Looking forward to a weekend of not being on call. Yeah, got a lot to look forward to, buddy.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the weekend. I'm not one of those that is just racing towards Friday every single time. I
Hmm.
like my job. I like what I do, but it's definitely something, especially after this week, been a little rough. But the weekend always brings hopefully some Warhammer. Not always, depending on
Yeah.
schedule, but usually you get to play or at least hobby, build some stuff, paint
Hmm.
something like that. So I'm looking forward to the weekend. We have a great show, very, very heavily news packed today. We're going to talk about the Space Marine firstborn models that are being shipped off to the old folks' home. They are being retired by Games Workshop finally, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We're going to share some updated impressions of the official 40K app, and I've actually had a chance to play some games using the app and really trying to put it through its paces, so we'll have some additional impressions there. We're going to talk about the Legions Imperialis terrain or Epic 40K terrain. That's been revealed, some implications on what we think that might mean for the larger 40K game as well. And then finally, we'll talk about Metawatch, which is just the update to the rule set and some of the data sheets and things like that, the impact that's made in the tournament scene. But since we're a casual podcast, we're going to talk about how that doesn't necessarily mean doom and gloom for your armies if you're
Hmm.
seeing your particular army of choice at the bottom of the barrel there. Thank you so much for listening to our show. If you like what you're hearing, make sure to rate, follow, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. You could also find us on our website, dadhammerpodcast.com, and on all the social media sites, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, where we have pictures of our latest projects and comment on all the latest activity in the Warhammer community. But first, we're going to start with the most important part of every Dad Hammer podcast, every single one without fail. And it's one of my favorite segments. And
Yeah.
that is, what are we drinking? And Steve, I will go first.
Okay.
I think we've come up with a little bit of a trend where whoever has the really boring drink goes first. I
I
think
think
that's
that's yeah.
unless it's something so exciting that we can't even wait, like 2 minutes. So I'll go first because mine's boring, but I mean I like it. I'm drinking a beer tonight. This is from Tennessee Brew Works. This is a hazy IPA called River Drifter, and I like it. It's got a picture of a guy and one of those bucket hats with a bunch of fishing lures on it and a
Hmm.
beard. And honestly, Steve, it kind of looks like you. If you were to make a beer and just you went out fishing and somebody drew a picture of you on a beer can, I think it would look like this.
All of those things are possible. Yeah, absolutely.
But this is a good one, locally owned and operated, all those things. I always like to support local. And of course, sometimes I don't have a choice, just looking around for some kind of different beer to get. And, of course, we live in Tennessee, so there's a lot of Tennessee local beers, but I'm always on the lookout for something different. Maybe next time I'll be a little more exotic. But this is a good one.
Several anesthesiologists I work with are invested in that brewery. Two
Oh,
of the yeah
okay.
two of the guys went to school with the master brewer and the guy who started the line. So they're all heavily invested in the business, and yeah, I've had a
Maybe
lot of
this
their
is you.
their.
Maybe this is you on
I'm
the
gonna
front.
have to check into it.
There's a connection here. Interesting.
Possibly,
Interesting.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. It's good stuff though.
All right. Well, let's get to the real deal. Let's talk about the
Hmm.
cocktail recipe for tonight. Take it away, Steve. What have you got for us?
I had to bring them a game after the Boondocka Stout Wagon last
Yeah,
time.
the stout wagon. Yeah.
Yeah, whew, that was a good one. No, I made a drink. Oh, I didn't make a drink. I found a recipe. It's the original drink is called Penicillin. Fairly appropriate. So I
Mm-hmm.
renamed it Nurgle's Bane, which I think that works out pretty good.
Nice.
Um, it's 2 ounces of blended Scotch, though I'm not terribly a huge Scotch drinker. So I don't keep much Scotch around, but I do have a Chatanooga Whiskey, which is aged in Scotch cask, and it has a very Scotchy taste to it. So
Scotchy. Yeah.
Scotchy. So I substituted that. You do 3/4 of an ounce of fresh squeezed lemon juice, 3/4 of an ounce of honey ginger syrup, which I can include the recipe for that. It's got a separate recipe. Uh, which includes a half cup of honey and a half cup of water and 3 pieces of ginger root that's peeled and sliced. You boil that and sort of make your own syrup, which you can save for I think up to a month is what the recipe said. So you just add a little bit of that to your drink, ice, and you can put candied ginger or lemon peel. I didn't do either of those. Um, it's very tasty. Uh,
Wow. That's a lot
it's
of work. I
it's
mean,
a
did
little
you?
bit of work.
I mean, this is not
Um,
the. This is like you're making penicillin. I
yeah,
mean,
well, I mean, I
from
guess if
scratch.
you let it sit around long enough, I suppose it would. Uh, no, it's not that bad. You know, I think you could probably take and just make honey and lemon, and maybe substitute the ginger for some ginger beer if
Mm-hmm.
you want that
Okay.
just that taste.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Uh,
more up my street. I don't know about the
yeah,
ginger root and making my honey ginger syrup.
that's
That's a
right.
lot of work.
I used powdered ginger, and I'm not sure if that's just such a good idea. Um, it
That
didn't
close
taste
enough.
it didn't taste too hot. I did the ginger beer substitution
Okay.
thing,
Yeah. There you go.
but I wanted to give the proper recipe if you're a proper
Mm-hmm.
cocktail person. Um, it's got like a really sweet lemonade taste. If you could imagine a really sweet smoky lemonade.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really good. I was kind of hesitant. I was like, let's see how that pairs together. It's got a nice bold flavor. I like it. It's a do over for sure.
Yeah. Well, it looks fairly complex, but I like that you've maybe altered it a little bit to take the lazy man's way out, which is usually what I end up doing. I just dump some stuff in and go for it. Well, you enjoy your Medicae Steve special, your Nurgle's Bane, and I will drink my hazy IPA. Cheers and bottoms up, Steve.
Cheers.
Well, let's get into some news here, and we're going to start first, appropriately, with the Firstborn, and they are those models, the Firstborn. And I mean, I'm just going to come out and say it. The Firstborn models are like the derpiest models that they have. They're the old models, the old sculpts, and Games Workshop has officially stated that they are being retired. I always thought it was confusing having Firstborn
hmm
and all of that built into that, because no, when you think Space Marine, you think Primaris. You think Primaris Space Marines with the big bulky armor and the modern
mm.
day space. That's what it is. So these Firstborn are being retired. They are off to play. I don't know what do you play? Bunko and shuffleboard. Is that what you
Pinnacle.
do in the? Yeah, or maybe Warhammer. I've often thought about maybe when we get to the old folks home and we retire, we're just going to be there and trying to roll dice with like yeah, our readers on to
Yeah.
see, but the dice are going to be really big. There's going to be those inflatable dice,
Oh,
the
that'd be perfect.
giant beach ball
Yes.
size, because that's the only
Comical.
thing we're going to be able to see.
Yeah. We fall and break our hip on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they are being retired, and looking over the models, I'm just kind of reminding myself those scout models are the ones. The faces on those scout models just
Mm,
scream, maybe 90s or even 80s. Some of those, I don't know when they actually were made, but they just look really, really old. Um,
yeah.
the older models, just my observation, and again, I'm dumping on them a little bit, but they were great at the time, I'm sure. But the older models just don't have that dynamic pose, the action shot that a lot of the newer
Uh,
ones do. Because the newer
Definitely
models, they're
not.
involved in some kind of combat, or they're sprinting towards something, or they're jumping, or they look menacing. And the old ones are just kind of there. They're more
Mm-hmm.
like GI Joe pose.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm not necessarily, crying over this. There's a couple of them that looked okay. I thought the ATV, some of the bikes are all right.
Mm-hmm.
The tank is okay, but I mean, any tears shed for the firstborn? Are we pouring anyone's out for the firstborn being retired, Steve?
I don't know. I actually got a set of the scout models, the scout snipers on the
Oh
sprue.
no.
I do. Well, I didn't buy. I mean, they were given to me. I'll put them
Okay.
together one day. But they're weird. They don't. I mean, they're probably about the size of your Votann guys because they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
squatty and short,
Yep.
and
Yep.
they're just they don't fit right now. And the other problem is the molds and the sculpts have gotten so much better. But forget the size and forget the imposing figure or whatever. Man, I mean, I was putting together some of the stuff from the Leviathan box, and the sculpts are just amazing.
Yeah.
And the firstborn stuff just isn't there, and it can't get there. And I don't know. You'd have to do some pretty serious scratch building, a lot of kit bashing, and kind of if you wanted that portion of your army to look as good as what they're producing right now. So that being said, it's not a sad thing to see them go. It gives me a little bit more latitude and free reign and less guilt to chop them up and use them as uh,
Mm-hmm.
basing material or
Oh.
scratch building stuff. I mean, I've got some
Yeah.
ideas now that I don't feel compelled to put them together and use them in my army as much as I used to. The
Mm-hmm.
only thing that I'm interested in is pretty much everything in the Dark Angel stuff as far as the Ravenwing side goes. They have very specific models that are still firstborn stuff. A lot of their like the Ravenwing Black Knights were specific bike models and stuff that aren't like your typical bike squad.
Right.
Some of their speeders are, sort of decked out a little different. So I'll be interested to see if they go down a road of either upgrading some of the current vehicles that are replacing those.
Mm-hmm.
Because Outriders right now, rule wise, even Outriders don't really compare well to, like, say, a Ravenwing Command Squad or a Ravenwing Black Knight Squad. So and it's hard to make them. It's hard to make an Outrider generic Outrider model look like a Ravenwing model without just putting some decals on it and kind of putting some feathers here and there. But it still doesn't quite fit the mold. So those models may stick around for a little bit longer until they replace them. But other than that, I mean, I'd be happy if they replaced them. They're showing their age too. They're not. They have some kind of goofiness to them that don't fit
Yeah.
with the current line of stuff. You know.
I think goofiness is probably the best word. They look a little more cartoony.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing with a fantasy or a sci-fi type of a game that we're playing. It needs to be a little campy and over the top sometimes,
Yeah.
but the models just almost look a little too maybe elementary is the best word. Of course, they didn't at the time. They looked amazing when everybody was using this when they first
Mm-hmm.
came out. Of course, the only one that I would say that might be the exception is the librarian,
I
which
do like that one.
I like the librarian. I purchased the librarian, painted him
Mm-hmm.
up for the Space Wolves, and I kit bashed a little bit and put some wolf pelt stuff
Mm-hmm.
on there, and I swapped out the head of the staff for more of a lightning themed kind of thing going with the
Mm-hmm.
Space Wolves deal. But the downside is that the base it comes on in the model itself is just smaller than
It's
the
really
other.
tiny.
So you've got these intercessors, and they're walking around with the big, the modern day pauldrons and armor and shoulder
Mm-hmm.
pads and all of that. And then you got this librarian guy, which in theory is supposed to have the same type of armor. He looks just as kitted out as an intercessor, but
Right.
the scale is smaller. So I had to stick him on, a couple of more rocks and cork base and stuff to
Mm-hmm.
build him up a little bit, like he's standing on a rock. But even then, he just looks like He's not as strong. He wasn't cut from the same cloth as the modern day Space Marine. So I would like for them, and of course they've done it with the new Leviathan kit.
Hmm.
They've got a new librarian, and it looks much more in line with the size. But I still like the pose and the sculpt of the librarian of the firstborn here.
Yeah, because the Primaris librarian doesn't quite do it for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that model. It's
Hmm.
fine. It looks good, but it's just not very dynamic. So I agree with you there, 100%.
Yeah, and this is usually I whenever they announce that they're retiring or they're putting something out to pasture, that they're not bringing it back. It's usually a good thing. It's just their older
Hmm.
models. The only time it becomes a bit of an issue is if eventually the ones that I think are really cool now will probably be retired in favor of something else, and then I'll have to end up, especially when it hits some of the horde armies. Now you're going to have to go back and start looking at your old orc boys, for example, and you're
I
like, oh
know.
no, now I need to upgrade. But I think this is a good move. Of course, anytime they retire, that's just the firstborn specifically to me was long overdue, and I'm glad they're moving on.
Yeah.
So let's now talk about the new 40K app. Well, it's not new anymore. We've been using it for a while, but I thought it would be good for us to revisit it after we've played a few games and they've had a chance to put in some updates. They haven't really, added any new features or anything, but Steve, I wanted to give I had a recent game trying
Okay.
to really intentionally trying to. I had everything printed out like you normally would,
Hmm.
but I had an experience using the app, and I just wanted to give my updated impressions from where I think it could use some work, where it should they should add some more features to it. But what I ended up doing is, I print out the data sheets. I've got those in front of me. The problem with the current way that they have that set up is that if you've got a unit that has multiple weapon options that you could take, or
Hmm.
war gear, and a lot of times you should always just take the extra war gear, especially if it's free.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you look at your data sheet when it's printed out, it's not necessarily going to tell you what you have and what you don't have, what you chose. So if you picked one weapon versus another, you substituted, a certain type of gun for a missile launcher or something like that. It's not going to tell you on the data sheet. You just have to know.
That's right.
And the the difference when I look at something like the app, it will tell you what you have picked, what you've chosen, but there's so many taps like to get back into. So if
Hmm.
I was playing Votann recently, and when I wanted to see the war gear options that I have for my Brokir Thunderkin, those are the dwarves in mech suits, essentially shooting bolt
Oh, okay.
cannons and
Yeah.
whatnot. And I picked a different weapon because I was facing off against several vehicles. And so when I was using those, like I look at the printed out sheet, and of course it's not obvious. So when I go to the app, I have to tap like 3 or 4 times to get to it. And so what I ended up doing is using both, which
I
to me
see.
kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
So that was my experience. Again, I loved it for the quick rules reference. If I want to look up a keyword, that was really nice. That was effective. Instead of I rarely use the book unless I needed something more visual to look
Hmm.
at. But it was good for quick lookup of the rules, looking at the weapon keywords where you look at a
Right.
ranged weapon and you click on that the tap on the keyword on your phone or tablet or whatever, and it shows the actual rules for it. That's really cool. But I can't help but feel, and I know you've kind of got the same feeling. I can't help but feel that there's just I want the slick presentation of this 40K app to combine with the usefulness of Battlescribe. That's
I
what
do
I want.
too. Yeah. I mean, I found myself, I tried to use it a little bit in our launch day game. And I'm with you. All I end up using it for was the search function. So every time I
Yeah.
just like couldn't quickly find something either in my stack of index cards or on that quick reference sheet, I would just plug in a keyword and look, which that's actually really useful. They
Mm-hmm.
did a pretty good job. It's not as strange as it used to be. It used to be that keyword search pulled up some stuff. I'm like, that's not what I'm looking for at all. And now I feel like it was just a little bit slicker. But as far as using it for your entire army and everything else, it just is. It's too much back and forth. Maybe if you had multiple windows or something you can open up within the app and just like tab through, but
I wish it was almost like the. Do you remember the old iPhone when that first came out, and they had
mhm.
this album art view where, and I can't remember what the view is called, but when you were to scroll through the album art, you got, it's almost like a spindle look,
Okay.
and you could just kind of pick and choose what you wanted, and you could, with the flick of your finger through the
Mhm.
through the visual, you could see what the album art was and select it. And obviously I'm not a mobile app designer, and
Right.
I don't know a great UI from terrible UI necessarily, but in this case, I just wish I could make the modifications to the unit that I want preparing for the game, and then when I'm ready to play, whether it's web or an app on a tablet or something like that, and that'd be fine. I want
Mhm.
to be able to, it's like, see all of my data sheets in a reasonable single pane of glass, maybe four at a time or something like that, or maybe they're stacked almost like a digital table,
Yes.
and then I can just kind of pick and choose, but they've been updated based upon my war gear options. So it's the digital equivalent of what I could have with Battlescribe, but with all
Mhm.
the nice graphics and pictures and stuff. I mean,
Ye-
again, I'm not a developer, but it seems like something that would be obtainable for them.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking at it in look, it is light years beyond what it was previously, in my
Well, for
opinion.
sure,
It is
for
such a
sure.
better app. But if you're going to have a pay wall aspect to it, and it's going to cost people money, whether it's tied to a Warhammer Plus subscription or it becomes its own, subscription, uh, it's got room for improvement, especially if it's going to cost you money.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely, if it's something I'm paying for, I definitely want it, like you said, a little bit fancier, a little bit easier to do the things that I want to do. Like my army cards should be in there digitally, and like you said, I should just be able to flip through them as if they were leaves of paper, and
Yeah.
not have to hit a back button and tap here and tap there. It should be like some sort of gallery. I'm like, that's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. And
Mm-hmm.
then you just like pick it up and tap your keywords if you want to, or whatever. But yeah, I think if you're paying for it, surely there's ways to get around, like you were saying.
Well, I mean, as of right now, because if they don't improve this, what I'm doing at the moment is I like building lists using
Mm-hmm.
the 40K app. I like using it for rules lookup. That's all well and good, but I'm still, our friend Battlescribe that
Yep.
we thought was dead is actually not. It's still alive, still kicking. You can use Battlescribe still. It's updated with the latest 10th edition rules and points and all of that. The UI with Battlescribe is still, it is what it is. It's not the
Mm-hmm.
best. There is a learning curve there, but once you figure it out, it is, I would say, arguably the best way to build your army. As long as you have to know what you're doing a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. You have to know the army a little bit, what the unit capabilities are, because it's a little cryptic when you're going through it with Battlescribe. But once you build it, and then we use a website that converts the Battlescribe output, the roster, into something that's pretty, and it's called Pretty
Yeah.
Scribe. And you
Yeah.
can look that up. But you just upload your Battlescribe roster file into Pretty Scribe, and then the best part to me is that it also gives you what you're supposed to do per phase. So if you've got a particular character unit, like that does something really cool in the command phase, that's less so in 10th edition, now, but still you may have certain units that can only do things in particular phases. What's really great about Pretty Scribe is that it will put all that stuff on the first page all in one go, so that
Mm-hmm.
okay, no matter what units I chose, It's going to tell me what I need to do for this army, but also for the characters in the command phase and the shooting phase. Now, don't forget, you can do this in the fight phase.
Mm-hmm.
And it has all that laid out there, and it still has all of the stats for your units, which I think is great. But with that, I mean, still the UI is a little rough. And Steve, I saw that you had found a couple of potential alternatives to even to Battle
Yeah.
Scribe.
So I follow Auspex Tactics on Discord, and they just I'll every once in a while get a notification. They'll send out a blanket notification, and that's how I found out that Battle Scribe was back up. There was a little bit of a caveat warning saying that uh, they may not be able to keep up with all the errata
Sure,
and FAQ
sure.
stuff right now, but I don't think that's anything new. That's pretty.
No.
That's been that way. But they did recommend a couple of other ones that I had never heard of. Let's just talk about new recruit. I looked at it. I'm not gonna lie. Um, it's a little dated looking, but it's free.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
honestly didn't try to build anything on it. It does
What's
have
it what's it
a
called again? New recruit? Is that
new recruit.
new recruit?
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and
Okay.
it's actually www.newrecruit.eu. So
Okay.
it's not a .com. But there is 40K, Age of Sigmar, Kill Team, Warhammer Army projects, all that stuff. Um, it's supposed to work with multiple platforms, your phones, tablets, computers, all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Battle
Mm-hmm.
Scribe compatibility. Like I said, I didn't get into it enough to know about how the UI works and all the interface stuff, but they do have their Discord link, and you can send them suggestions and everything else. The other one was Blue Scribe, and we'll include the link in our show notes and stuff. But it's
Yeah,
bluewinds.github.io.
github.io. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Um, it's nice. Its interface on the web is pretty smooth. Not like the Warhammer app smooth, but it's fairly user friendly and kind of intuitive. Now, I think you and I both had a little bit of a hiccup, and I don't know. Every time I was building just a Dark Angels 1,000 point army, every time I went to the battle line selection, it just scrammed. It's like
Yeah,
it shut
I was
down and
having the same problem. I was trying to substitute weapons and war
hmm
gear for. I was doing a battle line, and I would try to substitute war gear options, and it wouldn't let me. It was kind
yeah.
of a. I mean, granted, it's free, it's web based. There's a couple of bugs with it, obviously, but
hmm
it looks like to me that it takes Battle Scribe, puts it on the web, and cleans it up a little bit. It's
Yes.
not as complicated. The only problem, and I mean, even the official 40K app has this issue where it'll throw an error when your army list is not
hmm
compatible or you chose too many options or not enough options or something like that. It'll throw an error and just tell you that something's wrong,
hmm
but it doesn't specifically tell you, okay, go change this.
Right.
Um, Battlescribe does that okay, but you still have to do some searching. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
what are they talking about here? And you really got to kind of click around.
This didn't. Of course, I kind of knew what I was doing, so I was just flying through it. So I knew how
Yeah.
to not get an error. It was nice because it does automatically have a little drop down menu for your enhancements for each unit you have.
Mm-hmm.
You can go through and change your weapons, change the number of troops. It'll tell you, minimum and maximum. Um, and everything in it is kind of neat because all you have to do is hover over the unit, and it'll pull up a little bit more in-depth information about it before you choose them. So you don't have to like click on it and see if you like that unit and it's actually what you thought it was. You can just kind of hover over it, and it'll pull up the global abstract view of what that unit does and all that stuff. So that's kind of nice. It could save you a few clicks and
Mm-hmm.
back and forth. And then we're just talking about army building. So um, I decided to build out my list. I did finish it out. It looks right. compared to what I did on the 40K app. Uh, and I printed it out. Um, it prints out okay. Uh, 1,000 point army ended up being 8 pages, which is, you know, that's not perfect, right?
Yeah.
Because I could probably actually do that with my printed out index cards, to be honest with you. But it's only because the way it's arranged and formatted. Like some of my units are a page and a half because they
Mm.
include everything. Um, so you might be able to, because it is a roster file. I wonder if you could import it into Pretty Scribe.
Yeah, I think you can. It says it's fully compatible with BattleScribe, so that means you would be able to import it into PrettyScribe. But at that point, like, well, why don't you just use BattleScribe? You know,
Exactly, exactly.
this isn't giving me, if this were combining the PrettyScribe stuff with BattleScribe, then
Hmm.
okay, you know, that's a good option. But either way, all of these are free
Yeah.
alternatives to the official app. I really wish that Games Workshop would put a little more polish on this app and I'm sure they put this through its paces and they ask
Hmm.
people to take this to tournaments and use it exclusively. And you know, the development of these types of things, that it costs money to do, time, and you can only work on so many projects at once.
That's
So
right.
I get it. I'm sure this is not necessarily at the top of their list of all the things that they need to be worrying about.
Hmm.
But if we're talking wish list, and maybe the next time we look at this app in 6 months or so, maybe a year, I would hope that they had added a couple of features that we had mentioned here, and maybe that means we get to use this thing as our primary driver for our games going forward.
I agree, man.
Let's now talk about the new announcement, and you knew I was going to put this on here because it was terrain related. Anything terrain related is got my attention. Even for a game that I may or may not play, I'm a little on the fence. I was kind of a hard no for a while, but
Hmm.
now I'm starting to kind of get on the fence for this one. Um, Legions Imperialis. This
Yep.
is the new Epic 40K. I guess it's revitalized now. It's a Horus Heresy based Epic 40K game. So, as we mentioned in our previous podcast episode, this is a smaller scale version of 40K so that you can play larger battles, more troops. You can put in, it kind of goes on to the Titanicus
Hmm.
Adepticus, the Titanus Adepticus. I'm trying to think of the actual, the way that I'm supposed to say it.
Adeptus Titanicus.
There we go. I was close, right? Titanicus, Adepticus, Gamicus, Warhammericus.
Gamicus.
That's going to be the one I'm just going to call it. It's the Gamicus.
Gamicus.
Man, all this gothic stuff is killing me. You know,
And
I'm
it's
just going to
bad
make it.
Gothic. It's like I was gonna say pig Latin, but that's not right. It's just
It's like
like,
Monty Python. It's like
yeah,
Monty Python
it's like
gothic, and
street Latin.
but that's why people call it Epic 40K. So I'm just going to
Hmm.
say that from now on.
That
So
the
anyway, the announcement was for terrain for Epic 40K,
hmm
and what I love about this is that they're bringing back the plastic road tiles, they're modular road tiles, so plastic squares essentially, where
hmm
you paint these up, you build them. I guess there's not much building to it. You just clip them out. But paint them up, and then you've got these squares that you can put together. I know it doesn't sound amazing, but it looked like that the terrain is somewhat textured in nature. It's got the
hmm
roads and some of the cracks and things like that. And as soon as I saw it, it reminded me of the Realm of Battle tiles that they used to have. I want to say back in 8th edition.
Okay.
They had, if you go into a Warhammer store now, you
Oh
might
yeah,
actually
that's
see it
right.
on one of their tables where the roads have got big, emblems all over them and tons of battle damage and stuff. That is the Realm of Battle box, and it was this big box of tiles, much larger than what they're doing for Epic 40K. And they have that the problem with those was that they were really big, they're
Mhm.
bulky, then you're not going to be able to transport them, and then when you want to play a game, you got to get them all out and put them out, and they look deceptively easy to paint because it's like, oh
Mhm.
well, I'll just prime them and do a dry brush and I'm done. Well, those things are it's a big board. I mean, it was if you put them all together, it's a pretty big footprint. And
Okay.
painting, as someone who's painted a lot of terrain, a big building always looks like, oh, I'm going to finish this in no time. After you put a base coat on it, I'm just
Yeah.
going to dry brush it real quick and then I'll be done. And then you're reminded of how many skulls are on the buildings, how many,
Lights and wires and
yeah, and all that stuff. And so just imagine that, but spread across at the time, a 6 by 4,
oh
six
my
feet by
goodness.
4 feet, grid, and it would just
Mhm.
take forever. But that said, it looked awesome once it was put together. It just made it a little wonky when you put your models on it, and then it was loud. If you ever wanted to roll
Mhm.
dice, just imagine that, like rolling
Oh,
dice
I didn't think
on
about
a big
that. Yeah.
plastic mat, or there's no keeping the kids asleep when
Oh
you're
no.
playing on one of those things. But I always say this phrase I've uttered multiple times. I am a sucker for terrain,
Yep.
and this looked so cool. But I don't know if I'm going to jump into this. But I'm wondering if this is going to have implications, and I'm hoping so.
Mhm.
Implications and design and the way they've done this for Epic 40K. If they will do this with the larger 40K game, maybe even some modularity with I don't know if I want them to bring back the Realm of Battle and those plastic tiles for the battle mat. But anyway, I'm excited to look at this stuff, especially the spires, the buildings that are
Mhm.
have, the tall buildings for your games. Steve, I know you've looked at this game and thought, that's interesting. Any thoughts on the terrain? I know you're not a huge terrain guy, but would you get into this at all?
Oh, I think I would. I've uh, let's see how things go. let's see let's see how far I get with stuff because I don't know
Yeah.
when this is possibly coming out. Um, man, I really do like the idea of that scale. That looks like it could be a really good time, a lot of fun. All
Hmm.
the stuff that comes in the launch box looks really neat. Um, and there's a lot of stuff out there already. Of course, they were pretty smart marketing wise. They upped the scale by just a little bit, so it's a little bit bigger, which means it's just going to look better. In all
Right.
honesty, but man, having a whole city's worth of terrain on what constitutes as pretty much a combat patrol size board.
Yeah.
Because if you took this, what they're showing online, I'm looking at now, it's six 12 by 12 squares.
Hmm.
So you could take that, and that is pretty much that's a combat patrol size board. And I guess you could probably play 1,000 point game on it if you really wanted to. That'd be tight. But because now you're looking at, well, I guess that's 36 by 24. It might need to be a little bigger. But
Yeah.
either way, you could still do the same thing if you wanted to. If they wanted to make these 12 by 12 tiles and ditch the cardboard ones, and just make the scale correct for whatever kind of. Just I know it's the realm of battles and it's just what you were talking about, but I think that would be really neat. But yeah, it's back to that. I can have a whole game in a box kind of mental.
Yeah, it's a different market that they're going
Hmm.
after, and that fortunately we have a place to play here at my house, and I've got a ping pong table where
Yeah.
I put the battle mats down, and we've got the ability to play and all of that. But not everybody has that. I know several years ago,
Hmm.
earlier on, probably 15 years ago, I didn't have this space. I didn't have a place to,
Right.
much less a ping pong table. I had a dining room table and that was in the middle of my house. And if you think that my wife was going to allow, uh, tons of terrain and dice rolling and yelling at each other and everything in the middle of the house, it's not going to happen.
No way.
So I think a smaller game allows you smaller grid, smaller size, allows just a Warhammer to be marketed to a different audience, people that don't
Hmm.
have the room, and maybe they just don't. They're not into the building and the sculpting. This gives you it's a much more approachable way to get into the hobby. And I was listening to, they had a little video, an intro video talking about Epic 40K, and that it was just to be able to put together the models and put together a small force. There really is no assembly. I mean, I would think you
Right.
clip out a few things. It's like putting together a swarm model in
Mm-hmm.
the regular 40K game, and most of that is just you clip it out and you put it on a base and you're done. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and the notion there, as far as painting was concerned, was you spray it, you get a base coat on it
Mm-hmm.
with some spray, and then you can use contrast paints
Oh
because
yeah.
you're never going to no you the models are so small that you're not going to be able to notice the minute details. So contrast paints are perfect for this. So
Yes.
I actually see this not only as a cool way to play Warhammer to get your fix, especially if you don't have the room, but also a way for Games Workshop to sell more contrast paints. And I think I remember hearing at one point during an interview, I think it was on the painting phase with Peachy, and they were saying that contrast paints was such a big seller when it first came out. It almost, saved, for the
Yeah.
lack of a better term, saved Games Workshop. And this is a way to sell more. So, I for one am. I don't know yet if I'm going to get into this game, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited for other players who are holding back some on the larger 40K game because it's a daunting ask with the models and the glue
Yeah.
and all the painting, and this is something that's much more approachable in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so much, like I said, there's just so many ways you can kind of go with it too. Hopefully it's not a huge investment, money wise. So be
Yeah.
pretty cool, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and there's going to be a starter box. It'll come. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
they'll sell the terrain separately, or you can buy the launch box. It'll come with enough of a force to play a couple of games, just like you would in 40K. And I I envision them selling the expansion packs. I don't know if they'll
Mm-hmm.
sell. They won't sell individual units. I guess they could, but it would be a good idea to sell larger expansions for it so that you can buy. Um, Multiple units, and then you're just buying 2 or 3 boxes and you're good to go. So
Right.
this is an interesting prospect. I'm excited to see more. And man, if they release more terrain, they might just draw me in. Well, let's finish up here with our last topic, and it's a topic that we don't really discuss too much on our podcast, and that is the Metawatch. And the Metawatch, if you're unfamiliar, is really the term for the part of the community that is really focused on the stats and the rules changes and the points increases or decreases. It is the meta. It is what happens when
Mm-hmm.
essentially players go to tournaments and then they look at the win loss percentage or how individual players are making their lists, their army lists, and coming to tournaments and seeing the impact of the changes that are being made by Games Workshop to their various rule sets. So that is what the Meta Watch is looking at all those changes. And I personally, I don't really follow it that much
Mm-hmm.
because we play in a casual setting. We are competitive, but we play against friends to have a good time. That's why we play. And the Meta Watch is always interesting for me because it tells me number one, okay, well what kind of strategies do I need to change now? How do I need to alter my play? Um, but only really if it's a significant rule. But this time, though, the reason that we wanted to discuss it here, this particular Meta Watch, is because it's really the first one, the major one, I guess, the
Mm-hmm.
major changes that have come with 10th edition. Um, and I recently saw the win loss percentage results of a recent tournament, and my buddies, my pals, my
My
chums,
boys.
my boys, the Leagues of Votann. Not only they're very on the chart. They
Mm-hmm.
had like a 29% win rate,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is bad. That's like in the danger zone
Yeah.
for the tournament watch. But just to kick them while they're down. You know, if you look at the chart of where they are, they're at the very bottom, and it makes them look extra short, which I just think is rude.
Oh,
You
that's not
know,
nice.
a little bit of an insult to injury. So not only are they the quote unquote worst army, and that's what we'll talk about here in a second,
Mhm.
but now they're giving them the visual. It just looks like
Yeah.
they're on a step stool now, and that's just rude. I think.
Both, yeah, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
but even so, I looked at that win loss percentage, and it is my favorite army. That's my
Mhm.
I like the aesthetic, um, but that's the topic that I wanted to bring up, and I know Steve that you and I are aligned on this because I like the army, the way it looks, the way I painted them. You can tell that I put quite a bit of love and care
Mhm.
into painting those models versus some of the others. And I'm still playing them. I have a great time playing Leagues of Votann. And while yes, they're not as powerful as another army, potentially. There's just it requires more thought, but my take on this, and Steve, I'm interested to hear, the ups and downs that you've gone through throughout the, years of playing Warhammer with these Metawatch changes
Mhm.
to your armies. But the way I look at this is whenever they make a significant change to the army that I was running before, and shoot, Leagues of Votann in Ninth Edition would
Yeah,
just
no doubt.
melt your face. I mean, they were lethal to
Mhm.
the point where I felt bad, where it's like, okay, this is a little overpowered.
Yeah.
Um, Now they've nerfed them enough where almost too much,
Mhm.
but whenever I play, that just makes me think like, all right, I gotta pick some different strategies, and it's like me against the world now.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I don't know, Steve, what's been your experience when dealing with these types of changes with your armies over the years?
Well, I think I've played Dark Angels predominantly, so they've been sort of in the upper middle to middle. They've kind of been consistent, so they've not really swung a lot. And where they swing on their high spot, when they're at their best, there would have been no way I could really play that army to their full potential because I
Mm-hmm.
just wasn't there experience wise. So I think you kind of have to look at that a little bit. I've read so many research papers in my life to understand that sample sizes and sample populations have everything to do with the results that you present. So I think you need to be careful when people look at these meta watch kind of things, especially if you're a casual player. And you and I know this, and we talk about this all the time. Um, but yeah, if you have 100 people show up to a tournament, and this is where you're collecting your data, well, if 5 people play Votan, but 35 play Imperial Knights or Custodes or whatever, and the rules at the time may present them as a better army anyway. But if you're a tournament player, you're going to know that, and you're going to, like we talked about earlier today, you're going to min max your list
Mm-hmm.
to pick your army to win your tournament because that's where you're there.
Yep.
So if you have 35 people show up with what is arguably maybe rule wise the more powerful army at the time, and you have 5 people show up with like Votan, well, it's a no. It is a foregone conclusion that Votan is going to be in the bottom of the win percentage rate, just because their sample size is so small, and the people that are bringing them there are probably passionate about that army and didn't really get too concerned as to whether they win or lose necessarily. They just wanted to play the army they wanted to play. So it's gonna your percentages are gonna go way up, the more players that are playing a specific army. So
Yeah.
that's a long road to just say don't get too wrapped up in that part. Um, but I'm like you, it lets you tailor your list and your approach to the game. Tweak this, tweak that, and you might find a little nugget that you didn't know or didn't anticipate.
Yeah, and it's a good point because about the sample size, because I was listening to Stephen Box from Vanguard Tactics talk
Mm-hmm.
about his perspective on how the data is analyzed. Because if you look at all the armies, and I was listening to an interview with Stu, one of the rules guys with Games Workshop, that was there at Metawatch, and talking about all of it, and he was stating that there are many players coming to the tournament that are playing their first or second games of 40K ever.
That's
So
right.
they've never played before. So did they pick Votann? Did they pick Death
Mm-hmm.
Guard? Did they pick Grey Knights? Did they pick some ones in the bottom tier?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know, right? They may have picked Imperial Knights. Who knows? But
Who knows?
um, if I were to go to a tournament, and I consider myself a halfway decent 40K player, if I were to go to a tournament, I would just get rolled over. I think
Mm-hmm.
because number one, not only are the tournament players going to min max all of that, but they're picking the armies that have the highest percentage of win rate, and then they're taking min max builds with those high percentage win rate armies. So it's just increasing that percentage. And then the problem is that Games Workshop comes in, analyzes all the data, the win loss
Mm-hmm.
percentage, and then makes changes to buff maybe some of the lower armies and nerf the armies that are doing really well. So, I mean, I'm not saying that they do a bad job in any of that,
Mm-hmm.
but the point that Vanguard Tactics guy was saying is that they're making changes based on a variable sample size. There's like
Yes.
there is no consistent data, and they're making all these changes, and I feel like it's just a constant ebb and flow. So
Mm-hmm.
that is and you just stated it. That's a long way around to say don't if you're especially if you're starting out. If you're just
Mm-hmm.
starting out, and every player does this. I did it, you did it, our friends do it. The very first question that everybody asks when they walk into a store and they say, "Well, what's good?"
What is a good
What is
army?
I don't want to pick the wrong army. I don't want to pick a
That's
bad
right.
one. I don't want to get, trashed the first round. And what I was everybody's told by every single person is just pick what you think is what looks cool. And I think it's one of those things where you you can't you can't fully advise someone just because they haven't gone through it themselves. And it's just one of those things where you have to experience it. You have to build your army
Mm-hmm.
that you think is quote unquote good, and then see it get nerfed by Games Workshop, and then you're like, oh, oh, okay,
What did I
now I
do?
understand.
Yeah.
I think that looking at the overall stats, that it is important for us for any other player to not to get into this stuff. It's good
Mm-hmm.
to look at the meta watch. It's good to understand the stats and everything for the armies, but don't let it sway your decisions on what you think looks cool or what's fun. Just understand that the win loss percentage is really based on something that honestly I don't think it means a whole lot. It's just that's what everybody brought to the tournament, and that's what won, and that's about all you can take away from that.
Well, I will say the biggest positive thing I took away from that Meta Watch, especially on the Warcom article and the video with Stu and Paul from Forge the Narrative, um, I I got very focused on their discussion about the rules. They were talking about there was a lot of contention and a lot of debate on this. Like, all right, if you win, there is no choosing if you go first or second anymore. If you win the roll off, you go first. So a lot of folks were moaning like, well, if you go first, you're just gonna win. And Stu brought up a very good point that the data so far, so you could take away this good army, bad army, win percentage, lose percentage, and just take away what army it was, just forget it. But they looked at it in a raw data, and it was 50-50. The people that went first that won the game versus the people that went second that won the game.
Hmm.
So that speaks a lot to at least that rule. But the rules that follow have to be fairly well balanced if it just didn't completely blow everything out of the water as to when you started, where you started in the process. So, and another rule was the tactical versus static. objectives that you choose on those that deck of cards. I think that was a contentious spot. Like people were like, well, surely this is going to give someone a benefit if they just take static, uh, not random. Like you choose your secondary versus a random draw.
Yeah, the fixed
The fit,
versus tactical.
that's it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and again, data pointed to like maybe a 3% sway in one way or the other. So it just shows that probably had to do more with player style. So player X's style, they're going to choose fixed objectives. This other player style, they may be more prone to do a tactical kind of choice, but that's their play style, so they know that, and they thrive in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I was most interested at the end of the day and the end of the discussion. It seemed like the rules themselves were working okay. Like the core rules and the core mechanics of the game are very well balanced, because there wasn't anything in there that they talked about that swayed anything one way or the other. Um, so I think that's very positive. I think that's a good look for the entire system and the entire game. And then you can like worry about this army stuff on a different level. I think you and I talked about it earlier today. I feel like the Warhammer 40K is two games. You're in the casual camp, where a lot of this nuance and minutia of the win-loss rate and the factors that lead to that don't really play into our kind of game.
Right.
Or you're playing the tournament game, which is a different mindset, a different list building, a different skill set. So things will look different to that person than they would to us. Both are valid, and both are necessary, I think, for the health and growth of the game. But I think you gotta have to realize that.
The majority of players are casual. I mean, that's the vast majority. It's almost like when I remember when Nintendo started with their when they came out with the Nintendo Wii, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody laughed at them because they weren't going for performance. They weren't trying to get the powerhouse console to compete with PlayStation and Xbox. And their whole strategy was like, well, there's more people that aren't playing games than there are. So
Yeah.
we're going to go after the people that don't play video games, and maybe we can get the grandma and grandpa to play
Mm-hmm.
video games because it's so approachable. And guess what? They did, because they went after a different audience. And so I think what Games Workshop has in its hands, and you put it very succinctly, is that they've got the competitive scene, which is going for absolute powerhouse performance. They want the best. They want the min max, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people that I know that are hardcore into any hobby. They want maximum performance. They will spend. I mean, and I used to be an athlete. I'm not an athlete anymore, but in sports and athletics, you if you do it all the time, you're looking for anything to give you a competitive edge.
Right.
And that's where the competitive scene is competitive. That's what it's in the name. But in the majority of players, ourselves included, I would consider, I'm sure a lot of people would look at us and say that we're hardcore, because I mean, we have a Warhammer podcast. I
Yeah.
have tons of armies. I've got a room dedicated,
Mm-hmm.
essentially to wargaming. And they'd say, "Oh my goodness, you must be really hardcore." And I'm like, "No, I'm actually pretty casual about it." So
Yeah.
there's a
It's just an
pretty
extreme
big
hobby.
divide, a separation between the casual audience and the competitive. And unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the competitive scene gets all the attention. It gets the bulk of the attention, and the changes are made. And then you have this ripple effect that
Mm-hmm.
causes the casual side to get caught up in the narrative a little bit. And then you
Yes.
get social media to compound that, and it becomes a little bit of a soup, And
Yeah.
so anyway, just to kind of wrap this up, my advice, and you and I know both agree on this. The advice that we have whenever you see this Metawatch, especially if you're a new player or you're considering starting Warhammer or something like that, is don't get caught up in this stuff. Just go find what you think is cool,
Mm-hmm.
what looks really fun to play, that you like the play style, that it's fun to paint the models or whatever. Just like I have with, I like orcs, I like Leagues of Votann, and no matter what, that's what I'm going to play.
That's right.
Well, safe to say there's plenty of game out there for everyone, no matter which side, which camp you're in, competitive or casual. Hopefully, this discussion is helping you make a more informed decision. But that will actually wrap our show for this episode of Bulgers and Booze. Thank you, of course, for everyone listening. Thank you, Medicae Steve. I hope you enjoyed your Nurgle's Penicillin, Nurgle's
I'm,
Bane,
I
your
feel
medicine.
healthier already.
Part of a balanced diet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you to this delicious Tennessee Brew Works IPA that I drank. Hope everyone has a great week. I am David the Warboss, and we will see you next time on Dad Hammer. Cheers, Steve.
Cheers, David.